Okay, so today we're going to talk about putting together different types of frames and foundation. There's two main types of frames. You can use plastic frames that are solid plastic. Usually a company called Peerco, Acorn. They make solid plastic frames, and those are just fine. There's a lot of debate in the beekeeper community, as you all know, whether or not you should go with plastic or wax foundation. Here at the bee store, we don't have solid plastic foundation or solid plastic frames, but we do have wood frames with plastic foundations. And the three main types of foundation that we have here are plastic foundation. This is Man Lake's plastic foundation, and it's a plastic honeycomb pattern. It's got deep wells and nice grooves here for the bees to draw on, and it is covered with beeswax. And this comes in a standard or a premium, which has an extra amount of beeswax. And if you ever use this and the bees don't seem to be drawing it out, you just add more beeswax to it, and that usually helps. We have wax foundation, and this foundation is called wired wax with hooks. And so this, you can see there's wires already embedded in it, and there's hooks at the top that are just really just tabs of the wires that extend out, which you'll see in a few minutes is going to be helpful to hold on to the top of the frame as we put it in. So this is really good foundation. It's good for, obviously this is a deep frame, but it's a little bit more sturdy than just a pure wax foundation. And then we also carry a pure wax foundation. This is just a pressed sheet of pure beeswax. This one right here happens to be a small cell foundation. And if you wanted to use this simply because it is more natural, more organic, whatever the case may be, that's fine too. But this particular frame will require a little bit extra work because we'll need to put in some wiring and supports in this. Now, this type of foundation is great if you plan to get comb, if you were to put it in a medium or shallow frame, and you can punch right through it and take the honeycomb out as you're harvesting your honey crop for the year. You can also take this plastic or this wax foundation and cut little strips, maybe a 1-inch strip at the top. If you want to go foundationless, attach it to the top of a frame, and then you can let the bees draw it straight down. So this is a good option if you wanted to go foundationless and use this as a starter strip. The first frame that we're going to build today is going to be a plastic foundation. Now, there's a lot of arguments about whether bees like plastic or don't like plastic. I use plastic almost exclusively, and it works just fine. Benefits of plastic is that you can reuse it. It's easy to scrape the old comb off, wash it up really well. It's very durable, and so basically lasts you forever. Once you have to wash it off, clean it up, just apply some more wax to it, and you're good to go. You can start it again. They have these little tabs on the corners. Almost all of them do. You can just break them off. These are called communication ports or communication tabs, and it just allows the bees to go back and forth. Whether or not you break them off or not is a totally personal preference. It doesn't really matter. Another benefit of these is these go together quite well. So as far as assembling your frames, these are pretty quick. So the first frame we're going to build is one for plastic foundation. And one of the main differences in plastic and wax foundation frames is whether or not it has a wedge. For a plastic foundation, you do not need a wedge. For wax foundations, you'll need a wedge, and the wedge is actually attached to the top bar, and you'll see a little groove cut all the way down the length of the top bar. That's actually the wedge, and we're going to cover that in just a minute. But for plastic foundation, you have no wedge, and on your sidebars, there are no holes. Sidebars have no holes because you don't need them in the plastic foundation. So to assemble your frame, we're just going to simply put it together like a puzzle. We put the top bars in first, and I like to use a little stapler. You can put glue on there if you care to. But with a staple, you don't really need to. It's nice and sturdy. Then the bottom bar, it's really hard to mess this up because the widths here are two different widths. You can't put the bottom on the top or the top on the bottom unless you try really hard. Staple it right on there. And there we have it. We have an assembled frame. It's nice and sturdy. Now, if you wanted to, not always necessary, But sometimes when you have manufactured frames, the weakest part is here at the top, because this is where you're prying. The bees are going to glue all this down, glue it together. So you might want to put a little nail, a brad, right through the horizontally through your bar. Now we have our frame assembled. We take our plastic foundation. We want to put our communication holes on the bottom, but it really doesn't matter. It's not gonna, the bees don't care if you get it upside down. Simply put it in the bottom groove and pop it right in. Voila, you have one frame. Only 20 more to go, and you have a beehive set up. So that's all. That's all is required for a plastic foundation and a deep frame. The next type of foundation that we'll use is called a wired wax foundation, and we talked about it a little bit. This foundation is wired with hooks, which means it's got little tabs on the top. We want to make sure we have a top bar with the wedge, so you'll see this little groove there. We want side bars that have holes in them. Now all of these are standard. It doesn't matter which company you buy your equipment from, but a deep frame is a deep frame, a medium frame is a medium frame. They're all standard sizes. So they should all fit together quite well unless you get some kind of crazy one. Now for the wired wax foundation, it's recommended that you use what's called a split bottom. So, and unlike a grooved bottom, which simply has a grooved notch there, we want to use a split bottom. It goes all the way through. This allows you a little bit more play in there, and it also makes it a little bit easier to clean out when it comes time to replacing your frames. You can take your frame cleaner and then clean right out. The first thing we want to do is remove this groove. So you can just take a pocket knife and we'll just cut this groove right off. It's easy to come off. Okay, and so this is called your wedge. Now what we want to do is clean off this little piece right here so we have a nice fit. And you just take your pocket knife and take the sharp edge of a hive tool, a box cutter, what have you, and we just want a nice little smooth surface right there. And the same thing with our little wedge. Kind of clean that up just a little bit. Okay, so we're going to set our wedge off to the side for just a few minutes. Now we'll go ahead and assemble the frame. You can add a little bit of wood glue on there. It's not going to hurt anything. Some people say not to use glue. It's all personal preference, really, like everything else in beekeeping. Now, we remove this wedge, and we see we're going to have this little shelf right here where the wedge was. So at this point, we're going to take our wired wax foundation, and we'll slide it down through the hole in the bottom, the split groove bottom. Nice and easy. Remember, beeswax is very thin. It's pretty fragile. There we have it. It's in there nice and easy. And we're going to lay these hooks down on that little ledge. And those hooks we're going to put underneath the wedge. There we go. And we can use our form board right here to help us out. It sets in here just so. We're going to set this wax foundation right up towards the top. There we go. Now we'll take our wedge and we'll put it back in just the way it was. But we want to get it nice and snug. So this little wedge is going to hold those little hooks in, and it's going to hold the wax foundation in nice and easy. Now at this point you can use a small nail. I use these little number 18 wire nails. They're very handy. Or you can use a staple gun. And I like to use a staple gun just because it's nice and easy. And knowing me, I would put the hammer right through this very fragile wax. And I'm just going to put a staple right in the middle. Right on. Get it nice and snug. Right on the end. And on this end, nice and snug. So now you see I have foundation is being held in by this top wedge, which is stapled right in there. And if I need to, I can just take a little screwdriver or pocket knife and pop those staples right out, and then I could replace this piece of foundation. Now what you'll often find with these types of foundation, especially wired vertically, is in between these, the bees will tend to build up. So they'll build up on one side, and it'll actually push the foundation outwards, and it can actually push it right out the bottom. So what we're going to do there to try and counter some of that pushing is put a couple of support pins in. Well, we're going to put a couple pins in like so, up and down this frame. It's going to help hold the sides in one place. So just remember to go nice and easy, because again, this wax is fragile. There. So now when I put that in there, I can push and it's going to hold against these pins. I put them on each side, and there we have a nice sturdy frame. And remember, once your bees attach wax to both sides, it's going to hold that foundation in very nicely. But until they do, you want to give them a little hand, and these little pins will help it. And it'll make a lot less mess of your box, because you don't want your frames all wonky. Okay, so just doing that makes it a lot sturdier, and if the bees start pushing on one side or the other, it's going to help hold it in just a little bit better. And so there you have it. That is a wired wax foundation with hooks, and it is a pretty sturdy foundation. It's a little bit more rigid, and there you have it. Now the last type of foundation we're going to go on is just the pure wax foundation. And this particular foundation that we have here, this pure wax, is small cell foundation. So if you wanted to choose small cell foundation, it's often found without wires, it's often found without the hooks, and it's just pure wax. Now there's a couple extra steps involved in building purely wax foundation. One, we have to prepare our sides, our sidebars, with little eyelets. Now this isn't absolutely necessary, but unless you want to replace your frames more often than you need to, it's a good idea to simply put the eyelets in. You need a little eyelet punch and some eyelets. And we just push them into the side. So it's going to reinforce this little hole where the wire is going to go in. Otherwise the wire will cut into the wood, which really is not going to be that bad of a deal. But over time, that can really start wearing out your wire, start wearing out your sidebars, and you might as well make your equipment last as long as possible, so you don't have to keep repairing it. It only takes a couple seconds to put the eyelets in, and it'll save you a lot of headache in the future. We have two sidebars with the eyelets in, and this is going to help protect the sidebars for years to come. All right, next step, once again, we got a wedge top. So the only difference when you're looking at top bars, it says wedge top, it's got this little groove, and we're going to cut that out just with a pocket knife. For this one, we're going to need what's called a form board. You can make these. There's all kinds of diagrams on the internet that you can make your own. I've seen some where people just use the table saw, all the grooves that are in a table saw. It works just fine. But for us today, we're going to use this form board. These form boards are all standard, so they'll fit all the different pieces. Now, the first thing we're going to do is assemble our frame. Make sure the eyelets are on the outside of your sidebars. And for this purely wax foundation, we're going to use a grooved bottom rather than a split bottom, because the groove is going to help hold that wax in just a little bit more. All right. All right, so there's our frame put together. Our eyelets are on the outside. And what we're going to do now we'll have to wire this frame. So we need to run support wire through the frame because this wax here is going to be very fragile, it'll be very weak. And without an additional support with the wires, it could easily break, the bees will push it out, or they might just eat it and recycle it and use it in other places. So this wire is a standard wire. You can use fishing wire if you want to use fishing wire. It's all good. Be careful with your wire because if you let it loose, it's going to spin backwards on itself. And before I get going, I just keep going like a tennis match here. We're going to put 2 nails in the frame right above the end of our holes. And this is going to help us hold our wire together. So here's the top end bar hole and the bottom end bar hole. I'm going to put a little nail right there. I've got this handy dandy little framing hammer. So we take our wire. This is standard framing wire, but once again you can use I don't know, high test fishing line. Look it up on the internet. We're just going to run through. Run it through from the top to bottom, bottom to top, doesn't matter. We're going to snug the wire up, going back towards the roll. Okay, it's nice and snug like so. Doesn't have to be too much, it's pretty loose right now, but that's okay. We'll wrap it around this top nail. And then we'll snip it off. So now we've got a frame that's kind of wired up, but these wires are a little bit loose, so we need to tighten them up. And so we have this tension tool. This is called a wire crimper. It's a pretty cool little tool, and we'll just start right at the bottom wire here. You simply put your wire in between these little gears, and we're going to just tighten it up. And so it puts little crimps in that wire, and in doing so, it tightens it up. So you'll see that this wire is now quite tight. Just using this little tension tool here, this little crimper. Now we'll take our wax frame. It's usually got a piece of tissue paper on it like so. And once again, it's pretty fragile. If you're working with your wax, especially when it's really cold, it's going to get brittle. So most of the distributors, whether it's Man Lake, Brushy, Cali Bees, Dayton, they're all going to say they're not going to ship you the wax foundation when it's really cold because it'll arrive in little pieces. All right, so here, remember we took that piece of wedge out, and so we'll just start right there. And what we're gonna do is weave this back and forth through the wires. Super easy. Take your time, because it is fragile wax. And then we'll just tuck this down at the bottom into that little groove. Okay. So now it fits just nice and easy, fits just perfectly, and this is one of the reasons we want the groove on the bottom, because it fits just right. And we want it to be nice and snug in there because it doesn't have any additional reinforcements. Now, once again, we want to take our wedge, put it in there nice and snug in the top. We're going to push it down as far as we can so we're holding that top of that wax foundation in really well. Once again, you can put a staple in here or a nail. I like to use a staple. Just keep it nice and snug. There we have it. So now we have our foundation in there and the wires. We're going to take one more step to secure this wire to the foundation, and that's called embedding. So we're going to use our spur embedder, like so. We'll place the frame on the form right here. Now you've got a nicely wired wax foundation. This is ready to go in the hive just as it is, and there you have it. So now there's the three types of foundations that we have here at the bee store. We have plastic, which is super easy to put together, snap together model. The bees like it, some bees don't like it. Up to your bees. We have the wired wax foundation with hooks. We use a a split bottom on that one, and it's a little bit less work to put together. And finally, we have the pure wax foundation, which we have to wire the frame, put the eyelets in, we tighten the wire up, and it's all ready to go. Now, as far as the debate between plastic and wax goes, my advice is always try it. Try some plastic foundation, put some wax foundation in there, see what your bees like, and it's really not what you want to do, it's what your bees do. So give it a shot, try it out. If you have any questions, you can always find us here. We have all this stuff available for you, and we can show you how to use it here at the bee store.